The 2023 Miami Grand Prix is done and gone, and while it might not have been the most exciting race from start to finish, there's still plenty to talk about it, and we're going to do that right now. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Dakota, and we are going to be talking about the Miami Grand Prix. Just wrapped up not but a few hours ago, and I have finally gotten my thoughts together, and I want to talk about it. We're going to talk about qualifying reaction, we're going to talk about Grand Prix reaction, and then we're going to go over the predictions I made before the race weekend began and see how I was able to predict the future. Whether I was or wasn't, I guess time will tell. But with that said, let's go ahead and jump into exactly what happened on Saturday for the Miami Grand Prix. Saturday came and went, and qualifying was a spicy one to say the least. We saw some pretty decent action as we made our way through qualifying, but just to hit the highlights, the first thing I wanted to bring up is that I'm sorry, Charles. I somehow managed to curse you, even though I did not know I possessed the power to do so. I said in my predictions video that I think Charles might be one of the best, if not the best, qualifier on this grid. And what did he do immediately going out on his final lap of Q3? He puts it in a wall, causes a red flag, and gives us, realistically, even though he did crash out, a very spicy grid to start the Grand Prix on Sunday. So I'm sorry, Charles, I really didn't mean to do it, but I guess we got a decent starting grid out of it. I mean, we got a bit of a mix-up with Verstappen down in P9, Leclerc starting in 7th, Kevin Magnussen, by the way, starting in P4, and realistically, Nico Hülkenberg also should have been into Q3, but he just got held up a little too much in Q2 and was unfortunately out in Q2. So it was a bit of a wild one, as we saw a very mixed up top 10, as well as if we started to look ahead just a little bit, there was the chance, even albeit a small one, of some inclement weather coming for the rest of the weekend. And so I think everyone's ears just perked up a little bit more with the idea of a wet weather race coming into Miami, especially with a mixed up top 10. It was going to be very spicy, and yeah, it was very exciting. Everyone was getting pretty amped up for the race. And speaking of that, let's go ahead, we'll jump straight into the Grand Prix. It just wrapped up, like we said, so fresh on the mind. Let's go ahead and let's talk about it. By the time the checkered flag fell, we had seen 57 laps of actually perfect, technically racing, as we saw no yellow flags, no incidents, no DNFs, no real much of anything. The only thing we really saw was right at the beginning, Logan Sargent, the Florida man himself, was the unfortunate receiving end of some front wing damage, so he ended up having to box pretty early for a set of hards and a new front wing. But other than that, we saw, I think I saw the math as a total of 1,140 laps around the Miami Autodrome, whatever they call it, around the car park, around the Hard Rock Stadium there in Miami. And by the end of it, it was obviously the inevitable Max Verstappen to come home and to win the Miami Grand Prix. Sergio Perez coming home in P2, and Fernando Alonso, a very familiar trio adorning the three steps of the podium around Miami. But that said, it was not without some exciting moments, to say the least. I mean, first we should start with talking about Max and just how inevitable it feels he is at this point. I mean, we saw in the beginning, in the first 10-ish laps, he was making his way up through the field pretty successfully, to say the least. And I remember I was saying that after he got by the next person, I always mention, I would say to my television, because they can absolutely hear you through the television, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I was saying, I remember especially when he got up behind the rear wing of the Mercedes of George Russell, I said, George, you have one job. You may not like it, and you may be the perfect man for the job, and I know it's not lap one, but we have some defending to do against Max Verstappen. Of course, the Mercedes, it really isn't a match for that Red Bull. So eventually Max obviously made his way through the field on an alternate strategy to Sergio as well. And by the time that Checo came in for his hard tires, Max did, I think, an extra 30 something laps on those hard tires before pitting for some mediums, which pulled him away by 5+ seconds by the end. So really, Max Verstappen is inevitable, and we are just going on our own, marching along the season, watching him and Checo fight for a World Drivers Championship, and Checo might be the underdog of all underdogs for this one. So other than that, Checo P2, I mean, ran about as good a race as I think you can ask for. Obviously asking him to defend from Max Verstappen on fresh mediums when he was on 30-something lap old hards. I feel like at that point was a tall task for sure, and I think Checo kind of got the maximum out of that specific strategy today. So big ups to Checo. And then Fernando Alonso coming home, finishing P3, I think getting the maximum out of that Aston Martin. Nothing more to say. He ran a pretty solid race to come home and finish P3. Next, we can talk about Ferrari. Really just a massive no-show, as you know, Sainz picks up a penalty for speeding in the pit lane. A bit of an unforced error, if we're being entirely honest, and so nothing you can really do about that one. As well as Charles getting stuck in some traffic, making his way through the field. Shout out to Kevin Magnussen. We'll touch on that one here in a minute. But Charles really struggled to get through the field and make a mini position. Still getting points today, finishing P7, but realistically, Ferrari kind of a no-show here in Miami, even though they did bring some new upgrades. So it's safe to say on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, Mercedes, a huge day for Mercedes. George finishing P4 and Lewis making his way through the field to finish P6. I think that's about as good of a finish as you can ask for the Silver Arrows. Lewis obviously starting P13 very much on the back foot, and finishing in P6 I think is a massive day from him, and he drove probably the best race I think of his season so far. So can't complain too much if you're a Mercedes fan, especially when you're trying to fight the Red Bulls, as well as, you know, trying not to fall too far behind the upgrade list, as I think they still have yet to bring an upgrade, as other teams are beginning to. So I think a P4 and a P6 was about the maximum you could expect from Mercedes today, and you know what, they went out and did it, so big kudos to them. And then last but not least, I would be remiss to not mention Kevin Magnussen having a bit of a magnificent day. Oh, I find myself way too funny. But Kevin absolutely put in a banging day today. Bit of a slow start, lost a handful of positions off the starting line, but at the same time ran pretty comfortably in the top 10 throughout his first stints. And we saw probably some of the most exciting action of the day for sure, as Kevin Magnussen and Charles Leclerc went back and forth a handful of laps in a row, where Charles tried to get by Kevin Magnussen, where he realistically, Kevin made some absolutely beautiful moves to get back at Charles and get back in front to hold up that Ferrari for just a little bit longer. And then once it was about done and over with, Kevin ends up pitting out of the way, giving Charles the free air, not having to try and get around K-Mag any more than he has to. But it was a lovely day from Kevin, finishing in P10. Might have been a bit more on the table, but with Lewis and I believe it was Ocon who had been on the alternate strategy, the hard to medium. That medium tire was just a little bit too much of a tall task to ask of that of the VF23 and Kevin Magnussen to defend. But nonetheless, points are always a good thing when you're a Haas fan. Even though we start P4, I mean, points finish is exactly the goal. Nico Hülkenberg, I think, ran a pretty solid race after a bit of a nightmare qualifying from him, just missing out on Q3. I think he just kind of got unlucky on a couple of things and ended up falling down to P15. So a bit of a tough day for Hülkenberg, but points for Kevin Magnussen. All day we take that. Other things that kind of big shout outs to Yuki Tsunoda, finishing P11 once again. Is a bit of a very impressive stint for Yuki. Very consistent, either finishing P10 or 11 in all 5 races so far. Lance Stroll ended up making a big push to finish P12 after starting in, I believe, 18th. Alex Albon had a pretty decent day, finishing in 14th. Let's see, other than that, a bit of a torrid day for McLaren. Apologies, McLaren fans. Finishing in P17 and a P19. And of course, the hometown hero, Logan Sargent, picking up some damage at the beginning of the race, going onto the hard tires. I believe he ran the rest of the race on those hard tires, so he was going to be asked to do very much on those tires, and ultimately ends up a lap down, P20. Got a feel for the kid, but at the same time, I think that's kind of just the weekend that he seemed to have this weekend. But that said, let's go ahead. We'll jump into the predictions results. I don't think I did very good this weekend, but we're going to take a look at that right now. All right, as always, before every race weekend, me and my Twitch chat make our predictions for the upcoming race weekend. We do biggest positive surprise, biggest disappointment, our qualifying results, top three, our race results, top three, as well as, of course, us being Haas fans on this channel. We make our Haas predictions for the weekend. As always, you can hop in on the action in the Discord linked down below, or tune in at Mr. Dakota Zero on Twitch Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of every week, Central Time in the United States. We always have a lot of fun doing these predictions, but let's go ahead. Let's jump into my biggest positive surprise prediction. I thought Williams was going to come out and throw in an absolute beauty of a weekend. I predicted a double Williams Q2 appearance and a Williams points finish. I think the Williams had looked surprisingly good in Baku, and while Miami might not be exactly the same as Baku, I was hoping they'd be able to continue with that momentum and hopefully look pretty decent around the Miami International Autodrome. I believe that's what they call it. And unfortunately, we saw a Logan Sargent P20. We did see a single Williams into Q2, but Alex Albon not much able to do in Q2 to make much of it more than that. And of course, Albon being the top finisher in the Williams in P14. That's no points for my biggest positive surprise. But I will say, shout out to my Twitch chat who predicted Lewis Hamilton to be their biggest positive surprise. And while it may have looked in doubt during qualifying, they absolutely nailed it when it came to the race, finishing in P6 from P13. So I consider that a win for them. We don't keep score for them, but at the same time, it's always nice when they do, when either of us get a prediction right, as we'll soon see. Moving on now to our biggest disappointment. I predicted that my biggest disappointment was that it was going to be Red Bull wins by a wider margin than they did in Azerbaijan. Now, when I said this before qualifying, and I was a little bit sweating bullets when the Q3 incident with Charles Leclerc happened and causing Max to start in P9. But that said, it did not stop him from getting out into a Red Bull 1-2. And ding ding, your boy got that one right in Baku. Charles Leclerc finished 21 seconds behind Max Verstappen around Baku. And here in Miami, Fernando Alonso finished 26 seconds behind Sergio Perez. So unfortunately, I got that one right. 5 extra seconds. Red Bull won by a much wider margin around Miami. So I reluctantly will take my points, but at the same time, at what cost? Moving on now to our qualifying results, and boy, oh boy, did this one obviously take a bit of a hit, just like Charles Leclerc in Q3, because I predicted Sergio Perez to finish P3, Charles Leclerc to finish P2, and Max Verstappen to take pole position. I got 0 points, obviously, with Charles crashing out and Max Verstappen setting no time, really, making a mistake on his first run. I got 0 out of 3 points for qualifying, and this is one I was okay in the moment being wrong with, because we got a very mixed up top 10 grid for the race on Sunday. But that will move us into the race results prediction, where I also got 0 out of 3 correct. I obviously included a couple more correct names in this one, but for my race results, I had Charles Leclerc in P3, Max Verstappen finishing P2, and Checo Perez finishing the race in P1, and that was two-thirds of the names were correct, but unfortunately they are in the wrong order. Max obviously winning the Miami Grand Prix, Checo coming up in P2, and Fernando Alonso finishing the podium in P3. So I'm very wrong, and you're noticing a theme that I have been very wrong so far this weekend, only garnering 1 out of the 8 possible points so far. But we move on to our final prediction that we make, our Haas prediction of the race weekend. I predicted 3 things: 1 car into Q2. I am giving myself a half point because we had 2 cars into Q2, so I was technically correct, the best form of correct, and I was incorrect on the wrong side as well. We had both cars into Q2. I'm giving myself a half point. I will take that. I also predicted no cars into Q3. Unfortunately, Kevin Magnussen proved me wrong. Realistically, we should have had both cars into Q3 if we're being painfully obvious, but nonetheless, I get no points. Shout out K-Mag for proving me wrong. And my last and final prediction is that I predicted a terrible qualifying, but I also predicted that one car would finish in the points anyway, and ding ding, I get a point for that. Shout out K-Mac coming home in P10, proving everyone wrong, none more than me. So for those keeping track at home, out of a possible 11 total prediction points, I got 2.5. For a grand total of 22.7% correct. Not my finest hour, and at the end of the day, it was a pretty exciting race from start to finish. So my predictions ended up being very wrong thanks to a crazy qualifying and a Haas over delivering over my predictions, which I will take 9 times out of 10. Don't even worry about it. Guys, that wraps up our little shorter recap of the Miami Grand Prix. It may not have been the most exciting race we've ever seen this season in Formula One, or maybe even last season in Formula One, but at the same time, coming off of a very boring race around Baku, I think this one was infinitely better. As much as the internet seemed to be displeased about the showmanship and the fanfare that the US likes to put on, I think the race absolutely delivered. We got to see Max make his way through the field, even if it did feel inevitable. We got to see Lewis make a late charge. We got a Kevin Magnussen versus Charles Leclerc battle for multiple laps and multiple stints as well. And so I realistically, if we're honest with ourselves, this race was pretty good. I'm giving it 4 out of 5 stars if we're being entirely honest. Granted, the battle for the lead might not have been the most exciting, but if you look up and down the field, we saw plenty of overtakes, a lot of great moves, and realistically, I think it was a lot better than people are willing to admit to themselves. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Did you make any predictions for the Miami Grand Prix? How did they do? As well as let me know what you thought of the race and what score you would give it out of 5. But for me, that is going to wrap it up here. We head to Imola in 2 weeks. I cannot wait. We'll be doing our predictions the week of the race week, so be on the lookout for that. Other than that, go ahead, if you enjoy Formula One content, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be uploading plenty of F1 content, whether gaming or real life, as this season begins to unfold. And turn on the notifications so you don't miss a single upload to my channel. But for guys, that'll wrap it up for me today. I hope you enjoyed this weekend. Hope you're looking forward to Imola, and I will see you guys in the next one.